Hello, and welcome to Dig a Podcast, a show that tells the in-depth story behind the songs of the greatest band that is, was, and ever will be, the Beatles. In this season, Season 1, we will explore the Beatles' first LP, Introducing the Beatles, or our UK listeners would know it as Please Please Me. Introducing the Beatles was originally scheduled for a July 1963 release, but came out on the 10th of January 1964 on VJ Records, whereas Please Please Me was released on the 23rd of March 1963 on EMI's Parlophone label. Let's continue on our musical journey with
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ask Me Why. The Beatles were very keen students of popular music. They spent much time foraging through the NEMS record department, run by Brian Epstein, as well as listening to radio programs and going to concerts to find suitable music to perform for their stage act. They in turn became great fans of American music. Among their favorites were the sounds coming from Detroit, Michigan, which were being crafted by the newly formed label known as Motown. During their early performing days, they had chosen many Motown hits, as well as other R&B classics to cover. But the influence on that unique sound from Detroit permeated their songwriting as well. One of Lennon's favorite artists was the Miracles, as they were then known. Although this group, which featured the songwriting and singing of Smokey Robinson, were relatively new as of spring 1962, they only had 2 charted singles at the time, including the huge hit Shop Around. It was enough to influence Lennon to co-write Ask Me Why, the first of many songs to be credited with the Miracles' influence. Songwriting history. The songwriting takes us to approximately April 1962, with an original Lennon idea presented to McCartney. It was John's original idea, and we both sat down and wrote it together. Just did a job on it. Paul stated in his book, Many Years From Now, continuing, it was mostly John's. His reference to doing a job on it, as McCartney explained, most likely referring to its complicated structure. According to Mark Loshan's book Tune In, it was one particular Miracles song that was released in Britain at the time that inspired John to write Ask Me Why. This being What's So Good About Goodbye. The book states, with interesting melodic key shifts and a Latin lilt, Ask Me Why was written in the first person. The singer so loves a girl that he could cry with joy. The lyric is corny but tender, never cloying or syrupy, and John's literacy shows in the line, I can't conceive of any more misery. Not many songs use the word conceive. Several, however, had misery. Likely it was from All I've Known Is Misery in What's So Good About Goodbye, which also happened to include the words Tell Me Why. Lewison continues, Ask Me Why had other echoes of Smokey Robinson's artistry. Both songs opened with similar guitar figures and that verses that ended in falsetto. But this wasn't plagiarism. Smokey was just the springboard to John's creativity, his song ending up different. Recording history. Session 1. The first time the song was premiered in the recording studio was the first time the Beatles, with Pete Best, were in an EMI recording studio. This was on the historic date of June 6, 1962. They recorded 4 songs during this 2-hour session, 6 to 8 p.m., and Ask Me Why was the last. Brian Epstein had thought mistakenly that Martin was impressed by the classic rendition of older songs that the Beatles worked up, but after Buscemi Marcha was performed, it was apparent that originals were what EMI wanted to hear, given that publishers Ardmore and Beechwood were looking to secure publishing deals for original material from the Beatles' first single. This suited the band just fine, being that they wanted to record original material anyway. After an unknown number of takes were performed of Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You, they then presented Ask Me Why for consideration. George Martin apparently wasn't present during the complete session of the day, but was called in from the studio canteen, where he was taking a tea break, to hear them perform Love Me Do. Since Martin then took over the rest of the session, he was present during their unnumbered takes of Ask Me Why on that day, which occurred approximately at 7:30 p.m. At the conclusion of this session, it was determined by Martin and associate producer Ron Richards that the material recorded on this day was not worthy of record release, and another session needed to be booked for a further date. Nonetheless, this recording apparently was lost or recorded over shortly thereafter. Session 2. The second session for the song was actually not a recording session at all. This occurred on February 4th, 1962, which was the second time the Beatles, this time with Ringo, were in EMI studios. They arrived for a rehearsal session at 2:30 p.m., which lasted until 5:30 p.m. in order to rehearse songs to determine which would grace the B-side of their first single, How Do You Do It, was already chosen by George Martin to be the A-side. So after rehearsing this song, they rehearsed 5 other original songs. Love Me Do and Please Please Me were performed for sure, but noteworthy sources indicate that Ask Me Why was one of the other 3. In the end, of course, Martin chose Love Me Do as the A-side and P.S. I Love You for the B-side of their first record, since publishers' disputes argued against releasing How Do You Do It on either side of their first single. Ask Me Why was then left for consideration for another time. Session 3. November 26, 1964 saw the actual recording of the song as we all know it. This 3-hour session, with the purpose of recording both sides of their second single, started at 7 p.m. and ended at 10. The group actually arrived in the studio at 6 p.m. for a rehearsal session. The first 2 hours were spent recording Please Please Me, which was chosen for the A-side of the single. After a short tea break, they returned at approximately 9 p.m. to record 6 takes of Ask Me Why, the 6th being deemed the best. This was a completely live performance with no overdubs or edits. At that time, Ask Me Why wasn't a guaranteed choice for the B-side for their second single. They also recorded an unnumbered amount of takes of a new original song entitled Tip of My Tongue. After several attempts of recording this song, George Martin decided that the arrangement needed to be worked on and said to leave it for another time. This, of course, never happened, and the song was given to Tommy Quickly to record, which he did in July of 1963. The decision to pass on Tip of My Tongue left Ask Me Why as the B-side to Please Please Me. One thing was for certain. Beatles wanted both sides of their second single, like their first, to be original compositions. Mixing. 3 mixes were made of the song. The first was a mono mix that was made on November 30th, 1962. This was deemed suitable for the single release, which occurred in Britain on January 11th, 1963. A further mono mix, as well as a stereo mix, was done during the control room session for the Please Please Me album, which happened on February 25th, 1963. Apparently, George Martin felt that the original mix of the song needed a touch of reverb to match the rest of the album. Since the original session tapes were still available, a true stereo mix could be done. These mixes are the ones available on this day. Thanks for listening to Dig a Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. This has been a Team Wilco production. Until next time, if you know what I mean. See what I did? No? Okay.